So a friend of the channel's is building a DMR, and there was some questions that had come up about scopes. I tried explaining it in text message, and I literally wrote it in books, and it got to the point to where I wouldn't have even read that, so I highly doubt he read it. So I'm just doing a little video really quick talking about the different things you're looking for in a precision rifle scope, because I've actually had the opportunity to get behind the glass on some very expensive optics, and optics of a lot of different kinds. So the first thing you're going to worry about is the difference between first focal plane and second focal plane. Basically, the first focal plane, the reticle will always stay calibrated. As you zoom in, the calibration on the reticle will stay relevant to the size of the target. Doesn't matter if you zoom in or out, your reticle will always match the same size. Therefore, you can use your reticle for doing things like range estimation, things like that. On a second focal plane, your reticle will stay the same size regardless if you're zoomed in or out. That's the basic ABCs of first and second focal plane. Now let's talk about why it's relevant. Well, on a first focal plane, I found, in my experience, you must have at least a 15x scope to be able to utilize the Christmas tree and be able to utilize the measurements in the scope. Otherwise, the reticle is so small, because remember, the reticle gets bigger as you zoom in. You can, but it's very difficult to read the reticle unless you have at least 15 power. I found this out with my Trijicon Credo. That only went up to 10 power. Yes, on a perfect condition day, like if I put a piece of white paper in front of the scope, or it was insanely bright out and I was aiming at something of a bright color, I could pretty much use the reticle. But if I'm aiming into like foliage or something that's shadowy or dark, even with the lighted reticle, I was not able to read the hash marks on the particular scope to be able to estimate the size of the target. Now, you might be saying, well, I got better eyes than you or whatever. When I put on my glasses, I passed the eye test with perfect 20/20 vision. Even with my glasses on, looking through that scope, it's almost impossible to read the reticle on only 10x. Then I bought some Leopold Mark 5s. I shouldn't say some. I bought a Leopold Mark 5, I bought a Trijicon Terminex, and then I've been at the store looking down the glass of a whole bunch of different scopes. And yeah, it doesn't matter the brand. Some reticles are easier to read than other, but you need at least 15x on a first focal plane scope to be able to accurately read the reticle. This is the target at 700 yards with a 10x. Tell me how far away that stop sign is. The stop sign is 36 inches. It's almost impossible to read that reticle and give me a comfortable range estimation. Depending on the caliber you're shooting, that makes a huge difference. Yes, some calibers have a flatter trajectory and it don't matter as much. Some do not. Now let's look at that same stop sign at 25 power. Notice how you can clearly read the hash marks on the scope, and actually it's at 800 yards now because I backed up even farther. Don't worry, the scopes are off the rifle. Don't be like, hey, you shouldn't point your... I actually took them off of the rifle and used the scope camera to be able to take that picture. So, wasn't aiming the gun down the road. Anyway, now we're at, I believe it's 800 yards. I'd have to check the measurements because I'm not actually looking at the photo, and I took these photos like over a year ago. But, alright, so now notice how you can clearly see the hash marks, and you could comfortably give me a range estimation on that particular stop sign. So what's the point of all this? If you're going to buy a first focal plane, you have to have at least 15x power. Now there are exceptions. Some reticles are easier to read than others, like the old school military mil dot. I use MOA scopes, it's a more precise measurement. So what you would do is you would look at it and you'd be like a mil, and then you'd mentally divide it up into 10, and even your scope turrets usually go in a 1/10 of a mil increment. So I know it's not perfect, but I figure it out in my head. Like, that's the only way I can like quantify it. You could use that on a 10 power or an 8 power or something like that and get a rough idea of how far away the target is. And remember, when you're shooting at this size of target, it doesn't really matter so much on being precise. But I built a couple of rifles to hit precise things, like a water balloon or something like that at a very far range. So I need a more accurate measurement. So yeah, in old school military mil dots, you could most certainly use like a 10 power or less. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about precision shooting. So therefore, you're either going to want your mil dots cut up into 10s, which it wouldn't work. I mean, it could work, but it would be very difficult. on a 10 power or less, or you'd want to go MOA, which would be very difficult on a 10 power or less, or like a MILRAD or like an SMOA. Those would be insanely hard to use. I strongly recommend you get something that at least goes up to 15 power. It's not so you can see the target better, it's so it zooms in on your reticle enough to be able to take an accurate measurement. Because remember, your first focal plane scopes have 3 jobs as far as I see it. So the first thing they do is your follow-up shot. I did a little example right here. So what you would do is pretend you corrected with your turrets, like everything's dialed in, pow, you fire and you see the splash in the snow or you see the puff of dirt and it hits right here. Well, you would just move this over top of your target, essentially making you aim somewhere over here. But you'd be like, okay, I need to go 2 MOA right and 3 MOA up. That's my little aim dot now. So I put that over top of my target and you fire again. It gives you a really fast follow-up shot if you've corrected with your turrets. So say you don't, what are the other uses of an MOA or a mil-dot scope or something like that? That is range estimation. So you know how big your target is, whether that's a stop sign, a door, a telephone pole, something like that. You have an idea of how big your target is, you measure it, and you can use that measurement because you know that measurement is standard. So if a target this tall takes up this much space in my scope, it is this far away. Basic range estimation. And it's a passive range estimation. You're not shooting a laser at the target that can be picked up or seen with night vision or something like that. I mean, obviously you couldn't use this scope in the night anyway unless you had a night vision adapter. But you're missing the point. The point is, so you would use it, you would measure your target with it, and you could know how far away the target is. The second one is holdovers. If your target's on the move or something like that, and you're like, okay, I know that target is roughly 500 yards away, it's moving at 3 miles an hour, instead of correcting on my turrets and then I've lost my opportunity to engage that target, I just go up, say 3 MOA, over like an MOA or so, and I fire. And if I do miss, I have my grid that would measure how far away my miss is, so my second shot on target. So you can get target hits without doing anything with your scope at range within like 2, maybe 3 shots. So that's really cool. So now, if you don't understand how MOA works and why it's so important to have that extra magnification to be able to read the grid, here's what we got here. Now there's 2 different MOA measurements. Inside of 500 yards, or if you're shooting at a human-sized target inside of like 700 yards, you would use this one. You would know the target size in inches, and divide by MOA, and then add 2 zeros. So let me do an example here. Alright, so a stop sign, standard, 36 inches. 36 over, we'll say it's 200 yards away, so 18 MOA. I better check the math on that real quick. What's half of 36? Yeah, 18. So that would equal 2. And we're just going to add 2 zeros. So that stop sign is 200 yards away. And you just do it that way. Now, if you want to be more precise, what you would do is inches over MOA times 95.5. You're basically subtracting 5% every time, but that's really irrelevant unless it's really far away or you're shooting at something really small. Your standard math, like human-sized targets, I mean, you wouldn't be... you get the idea. Inside of 500 yards, you just do MOA over target in inches, add 2 zeros. That's simple. That's all mental math. You don't have to pull out a calculator for that. Yeah, the 95, what you could do is inches over MOA, add 2 zeros minus 5%. That you could do in your head, but otherwise, like times 95.5, you pretty much need a calculator for that. The point is, each one of these lines matter. If it's only a half MOA or something like that, that really matters. So you have to be able to really measure the difference between here and here. On a 10X, you could be off by 1 or 2 MOA, usually just 1 on a 10X, but if you go to like an 8X, like trying to get within like 3 MOA would be pretty tough. It kind of makes the whole measuring grid irrelevant. What's the point of having it? So, what I recommend, if you want to be less than 10 power, and there's reasons for that. The weight of the scope, it gets significantly heavier, especially over 10 power. The fact that you don't want to be able to see your target that close for military purposes. You don't want to be able to read their facial expressions and build a relationship with them, and then all of a sudden you got to fire on them. So, you know, zoomed out so you don't really see their face that much. That's another reason why you might want to even go with 10. But anyway, on 10 power, if you're going to go first focal plane, go with the military style mil dots, where it's got the dots, they're really far apart, and you can clearly see it exactly where it lands in between, and then you can try to chop it up with your head and be like, okay, so that's a half of a mil, to pull out my pocket calculator and do the formula for it, and like, okay, so there we go. Or go with a second focal plane right here with just a standard BDC holdover for like a 5.56 or something like that. Yeah, you have to be on full power for zoom for that to be accurate, but when you're talking about a target this big, should you forget to zoom all the way in or it's not quite accurate, it'll slide that shot in there. It's not going to work very well for like precision work at all. That's where this would come into play. But again, you know, going over a 10x has its disadvantages. You can really see the features of the target. It's a lot heavier. Those are huge disadvantages, especially when you're talking about with a rifle that potentially could be taking out, you know, larger size targets. So if you're stuck on keeping it light and going under 10 power, just go with the second focal plane with the standard BDC in it. That'll cover what you're trying to do here. If you actually want to go with like a precision rifle to hit like clay pigeons or water balloons at range, you got to go like 15x. Because you really need to be able to read that to utilize the grid. I don't see a point in going with one of these grids unless you're above 15x, just because it's so incredibly hard to read. ACOG, they got a standard little grid in there. That's for your holdovers. That would be what I would run on like a second focal plane. Anyway, hope this video had helped you out. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to help support the channel, got my Patreon right there. I also have affiliate links in the description down below. Just by clicking on those particular links. Even if you don't purchase that particular link is for, just clicking on it and doing the Amazon shopping you were already going to do anyway, I'll kick back for it because you came there off my channel. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe.